Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Glad you could all make it. So, as usual, and this is what it says in the pinned message in the live chat as well. First off, I will be answering questions from Patreon patrons and channel members. So, if you are joining us live in the live chat and you have something you want me to say or something you want me to respond to, or if you're going to be generous with a super chat or something, please hold on to that until I get through the patron and member questions. And Kara, I saw you said you tried to submit a question, and you got an error or something. You couldn't reach the site. I'm not sure what the problem is. I don't think it's a problem on my end because I just got John Burns's question like literally at the last minute. So people have been able to successfully send in questions. So I mean, what I will try to do is if you specifically had a question for me, I will go ahead and ask you to put yours in the chat like as soon as I'm done with the patron and member questions, and I can answer yours first thing when I turn to the live chat after that. If you had a specific question that you wanted the answer to. So anyway, all that being said, let's turn now to the patron and member questions, and the first one of those is from Kier the Extraordinary, and it says, "There's something that's subtly genius in Strange New Worlds that I just wanted to highlight. Sam Kirk. Jimmy is a genius. He goes to a strange ship and people seem to say things as if they've met before, but he knows they haven't. Taking the series from JT's point of view, it's weird. With Sam Mustache on board, then he can plausibly chalk it up to his brother gossiping/bragging about him. I like the way the writers said, okay, we want to crowbar in as much JTK as possible, but still need a way to avoid the pitnickers getting surly. As always, keep up the work, good and otherwise." Yeah, they've done a pretty good job with Sam. I mean, it could easily have been just, they using him for a fake out at the end of the first episode when they're talking about how like, oh, Lieutenant Kirk is going to be reporting for duty, and we're all sort of expecting like, oh, it's going to be Lieutenant James Kirk. They're going to say that he served under Pike on the Enterprise before he became captain, but nope, it was Lieutenant Sam Kirk. Aha, gotcha. And because, just like Pike was before season 2 of Discovery when he came in his current incarnation, Sam Kirk is kind of a blank slate. We really didn't know that much about him. He was he appeared very briefly as a corpse played by William Shatner wearing a mustache in one episode of TOS, and that's really about it. So having Sam come in and be a member of the crew and be sort of an in for James Kirk is a clever way to use him there. And he's done, he hasn't been in the show a lot. They haven't made him like a regular or anything, which I think is a good thing. But they've given him enough that we get a sense of who he is. We get a sense of his relationship with his brother. I know I've talked about this a few times already, but I love the way they introduce Spock being annoyed with him for being a bit of a slob and not cleaning up after himself. And they use that as the entry point for Spock coming in and getting himself introduced to James Kirk in the at the end of Lost in Translation, where Sam Kirk has just left and James is apologizing on behalf of his brother to Uhura, and he says something like, "I'm sorry about Sam. He can be annoying sometimes." And Spock comes in right at that moment, picks up Sam's dirty glass that he left there on the bar or on the table and puts it on the tray of a passing waiter while he says, "Yes, he can be annoying," or something like that. Like, it's just, it's so well done. It's so well done. So yes, I think they've used Sam in a smart way so far. Jason Geis, I was originally drawn to your channel for the Trek, stayed for the politics. Just before school started, I'm a physics teacher and union president for my district. Good for you. I did a massive binge of Stuffy and Friends. In one of the earlier episodes, I swear I noticed the DVD set of what I consider one of the best TV shows ever, Homicide: Life on the Street. So my question, besides Pembleton, who was your favorite character on that show? I was a huge Meldrick and G fan. And if I was mistaken and it wasn't the Homicide box set, talk about whatever you want. You were not mistaken. It was the Homicide box set. I love Homicide. It's also one of my all-time favorite shows. And other than Pembleton, and I like that qualifier because Pembleton's got to be everybody's favorite. Who doesn't love Andre Braugher, especially in Homicide? He's just brilliant. I really love Bayless. I'm a big fan of Bayless. And I know maybe that's an obvious choice because he's Frank's partner. But I mean, Meldrick is great too. Lewis is fantastic. All of the regular characters throughout the entire run of the show are terrific. But yeah, I mean, if it's not Pembleton, my favorite is Bayless. I just love Bayless so much. And he has, Bayless is kind of, when the show starts, Bayless is sort of the point of view character because he's the new detective. So he's the audience surrogate. And when things get explained to him and as he's learning the ropes, we as the audience are also learning how things work in the Homicide Squad and everything. So, he's sort of he's never really the lead protagonist, but he's like the entry point for the viewer when the show starts. And he has a character arc where he goes from sort of the young, naive detective who doesn't quite know everything that he needs to know until he gets to be a more experienced detective by the end of the series. And I love Bayless so much. And I think Kyle Sikor's performance as Bayless is always one of the highlights of the show for me. So I'm a big Bayless guy. Oasis, hey Steve, with the absolutely tragic passing of Bray Wyatt last week, please share with us your favorite Bray moment or moments. Outside of his Extreme Rules return last year, my favorite was his World Heavyweight Championship win in the Elimination Chamber. I was never more proud of him than I was in that moment. Feel free to also toss in any fond Terry Funk moments too. May they both and Bob Barker rest in peace. Yeah, it's been a rough couple of weeks, hasn't it? Especially for wrestlers, because we lost Terry Funk, one of the all-time greats, and then we lost Wyndham Rotunda, Bray Wyatt, who was a current member of the WWE roster, and he was 36. So I mean, that's rough. I loved Bray when he was in NXT, and I loved him when they first brought the Wyatt family up to the main roster, and I thought the Wyatt family versus the Shield stuff was terrific. And I thought they had a 6-man match at, was it the Royal Rumble one year? It was either the Royal Rumble or the February pay-per-view. I can't remember which now. It's been close to 10 years, I guess, since it's maybe even over 10 years. But there was a Shield versus Wyatt family 6-man at again, one of those two pay-per-views that was fantastic. That was one of the best WWE matches all year that year. It was just remarkable. And so yeah, I loved the early Wyatt family stuff. I really didn't dig the later stuff. I really didn't think the Fiend stuff was all that great, or the Firefly Funhouse. I just didn't. I don't go for the supernatural stuff. I don't go for the corny stuff. Like, I just felt like he was obviously an incredibly creative guy. I mean, he had ideas that definitely, pushed the envelope and expanded the boundaries, but not always in a very good way. Like, he had that match with Randy Orton at WrestleMania, I think, a couple years ago, when he left the company for a little bit before he came back for this most recent run. And like, it just, the finish made no sense, and it was all gimmicked up, and it had and there was that bit where like they had like an image of maggots projected on the ring canvas, as it just, he went, a lot of his creativity really needed to be reined in, and people needed to say, that's, you're a super creative guy, but we're not doing that. Same thing with his match at the Royal Rumble this past year with LA Knight. Just not the Mountain Dew pitch black match. Just not good at all. Just not good at all. But underneath all of that, I mean, he was in the ring. He was always a fantastic worker. He was a fantastic promo. He was a prodigious talent. I think sometimes he led himself astray by following the muse off, in directions that were not good directions in terms of his creative. But fundamentally, just an incredible talent, and a terrible tragedy to lose him so young, and yeah, but fantastic. As far as like single moments, I can't think of any single moments other than, again, that Wyatt family versus Shield match that was amazing. And Terry Funk, I mean, my God, what can you say about Terry Funk? A legitimate case can be made that Terry Funk is the best professional wrestler ever. And he's certainly one of the longest in terms of longevity and in terms of reinventing himself. I mean, my God, Chris Jericho has a rep in the more recent generations for, being good at reinventing himself. And it's deserved because he has reinvented himself successfully several times. But my God, look at Terry Funk's career. Look at the multiple careers that Terry Funk has had, where he was the NWA World Champion in the '70s, and then he reinvented him. He went to Japan with his brother and became a legendary tag team wrestler. Him and Dory Jr. became arguably the two biggest non-Japanese stars in the history of Japanese wrestling. If it's not them, then it's, Stan Hansen or Vader, but it's a very short list, and the Funks are definitely on it. Then he became a deathmatch guy with Onita and Mick Foley. He came back in '89 to WCW, or it was still the end. I think, it was technically WCW by that point. In '89, that was after the Turner buyout, and reinvented himself as a challenger for Ric Flair and became middle-aged and crazy. Worked for ECW in the early years of ECW and helped put it on the map. Then came back to WCW again in the late '90s and early 2000s, and he went back to the WWF. He had a run in the WWF in the mid '80s against Hogan, and then Dory came in again as Hoss Funk, and they were a tag team for a while. Then he left. I think he went back to Japan at some point. Then did the NWA thing with Flair in '89. Came back in the Attitude Era in the WWF as Mick Foley's tag team partner, and they were Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie. I mean, and that doesn't even touch like all the territorial stuff he did. His feuds with Jerry Lawler, his feuds with Dusty Rhodes. I mean, my God, there's so much. There's so much incredible stuff that Terry Funk did throughout his very long, illustrious and extremely eclectic career. He was one of the all-time greats. And with Terry, it's a different situation than Bray because Bray died young and unexpectedly. Terry was almost 80 and had a lot of health problems, so his death was not necessarily a surprise, but it's still very, very sad that we have lost one of the true giants of wrestling. Dana the Overripe Pudding, Boa Noite, Steve. I looked up how to pronounce that. That's Portuguese, and I don't think Boa Noite, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, once again, I shall miss the stream as I will be en route to another performance as Richard Burbage, who is apparently a very large ham. So I will use this chance to wish all of your viewers and community well and ask you to share the story you told me when I was grumbling about likely having a thin crowd for our opening. I hope that even though I wasn't playing Ricky Morton, I managed to channel that same ethos into my performance. P.S. Will you share the photo of me in my costume? 2 wrestling questions, or at least 2 opportunities to tell wrestling stories in a row. Well, first of all, here is the pic of Dana in costume as Richard Burbage for the play that she is doing, which is a stage version of Shakespeare in Love. So here's Dana as Richard Burbage. Check it out. There she is. And yes, that is a sword. She does have a sword fight in the play, and you can kind of see the picture is zoomed out a little bit too far. It might be difficult to see, but she does have a mustache painted on, a little makeup mustache. It's adorable. But yeah, that's Dana's Richard Burbage costume. I think she looks fantastic, and I have not gotten to see the show because they're not live streaming it, and it's down there in Georgia, so I won't have a chance to actually see it. But I am sure that she is absolutely fantastic as Richard Burbage. Now, the story that she's talking about is, so she was worried going into opening night. She was worried that ticket sales had not been great and that they were going to be playing to a very sparse crowd. And I told her a story about an extremely independent wrestling show that I went to about 10 years ago or so in a little town in West Virginia. I think it was Romney, West Virginia. And this show was being held in the gymnasium of a middle school, not even the gymnasium of the high school. It was the gym at the middle school. And There were maybe 100 people there in the audience. Like it was a small town and it was a very small crowd. And the big star on the show was Ricky Morton, who was a legendary wrestler in the 80s and into the 90s as well. But his glory days were in the 80s, where he was one half of the Rock and Roll Express alongside Robert Gibson, and they were one of the top babyface tag teams in all of professional wrestling. And Ricky Morton is one of the all-time greats. He's revered still to this day. He still wrestles, believe it or not. This was 10 years ago, and he was an old man then, and he still wrestles today. And he was especially renowned for being great on the sell. And selling in wrestling means when you are the one taking a beating, that you make it look good. You make it look like it hurts. That's what selling means in wrestling. When somebody hits you and it's a worked punch, which means they hit you but they pull the punch, they don't really hit you at full strength. Depending on, I mean, different wrestlers work their punches in different ways. A lot of wrestlers work it so that the punch barely even touches you. But the sell is when you get hit with that worked punch, you make it look like you got hit by a real punch. And Ricky Morton was a genius at that. And he was so good that even today in a tag team match, when the bad guys, the heels, are beating up one of the good guys, the baby faces, the baby face in peril in the tag team match, who is taking the beating and trying to get to his partner to tag out, that baby face, that wrestler, is referred to as playing Ricky Morton. So I went to this show, and Ricky Morton was on the show, and he's wrestling in front of, like I said, maybe 100 people. And he's in his 50s at this point. So he's one of the oldest. He wasn't the oldest person on the show, but he's one of the oldest wrestlers on the show and one of the most legendary. And he's working in front of a tiny, tiny crowd. And he is bumping and moving like he's wrestling at the Omni in Atlanta in 1986 in front of, 10,000 people, right? He's bumping harder than anybody else in the show. Like when a bump is when you fall on the mat, and he's taking back bumps where he's falling on his back, and that ring is just echoing all over that middle school gym. Like he is bumping hard and fast, and he's getting right back up to, do what he needs to do. And he's working like it's not a tiny little crowd with 100 people. So that's work ethic. That's dedication. That's professionalism. That's wanting to give the people, even though not very many of them are here, the people who came to see the show, give them the good show. That's that. And I have remembered that ever since I saw it. And I've always respected him for that. And I told Dana, it doesn't matter how many people come to the show, whether it's a full house or whether it's, just a smattering of people here and there. You go out on stage and you give the people who came to see the show the best show you can give them. And I know that you'll do that, because you have a sense of professionalism, and you're going to go out there and do your best no matter how many people are out there, just like Ricky Morton did that night in Romney, West Virginia. So, yeah, that's my Ricky Morton story that I was telling to Dana, and she liked it so much she wanted me to share it with you. So there you go. Brian McKinley says, "Hi, Steve. What would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me?" I think I'd be fine with a little help from my friends. And that's all I'm going to say. That's all the further I'm going to go with that, because the next line in that song is, "I get high with a little help from my friends." And I don't get high. I'm straight edge, except for booze. And actually, technically, I haven't even drank any alcohol for years. So I guess I am, without meaning to be, I think I am kind of straight edge these days. It's not that I wouldn't have a beer if there was an occasion to have one, or if I was in the right company, but for all practical purposes, I am basically straight edge these days. I don't have any liquor in the house, and I don't do, narcotics or illicit drugs, and never have. So yeah, that's as far as I can go. I'll get by with a little help from my friends. I'll do something else with a little help from my friends. And then I'm going to try with a little help from my friends. Not to stand up and walk out on you if you sing out of tune, Brian. So don't worry about that. Unless it's really, really hard. Like if you just, no promises, but I'll try. Duwan, so are you voting for Ron DeSantis? LOL. I can't remember my exact question, so I'll go with that. First of all, no, of course not. I'm not voting for any Republican, but does anybody really think DeSantis is going to get the nomination? Like if it's not Trump again, I don't know who it's going to be from that circus, but I really don't think it's going to be Ron DeSantis. I mean, I know that he is still polling in second place, but good Lord, like, no, I mean, yeah, that's going to be another Ted Cruz situation where, like, you know, people before the campaign actually started, people were like, oh, maybe this guy, you know, he's got a recognizable name and he's going to run and he has some donors behind him. And as soon as people across the country start to see him, they're like, oh, fuck that. No, absolutely not. So no, I mean, even if I were the type of person that would vote for Ron DeSantis for president, I don't believe I would get the opportunity because I really don't think he's going to be the nominee. Black Cover 95. This topic is a bit old, but I wanted to discuss an aspect about the strikes, specifically about movie studios using AI for extras. I've heard one proposal saying that they will pay an actor one time for their scan, which the studios will use in perpetuity. I've also heard that they want to use AI to generate entirely original people, cutting out human actors entirely. The former sounds horribly exploitative, but I can't really think of a compelling argument against doing the latter. There's no law requiring a studio to use humans, is there? And the onus shouldn't be on them to make sure people in an obsolete profession can keep working. Is there a counter argument I'm not seeing? I mean, I guess as long as the AI generated extras are not in the likeness of real people, I suppose there's no real objection to it other than just the general objection of, oh, studios are doing that because they're run by massive scumbags who want to pinch every single penny they possibly can. And I mean, just let's face it. If you look at the budget of pretty much any major Hollywood studio production, the line item for paying for the extras is never going to be like a huge part of the budget. It's just not. Even movies that hire a lot of extras or a lot of background actors, extras just don't make that much. You know, they really don't. And the idea that, well, we're going to save a bunch of money by, using AI to generate extras instead of paying people to be extras on the day like that. I suppose there's nothing wrong with it other than it's a shitty thing to do that will deprive people of work who exist and are able to do the work. Because you just want to save that much more money. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't, I don't feel good about it. And I'm not going to work up any kind of a sweat defending the studio's right to do it. I mean, is doing it that way better than, doing the thing that you mentioned where they want to scan a real person's likeness and then just use their likeness in perpetuity without paying them anything for it? Yeah. Just using completely made up people, I guess, is better than that. But it's still, it's being done for the same reason, because they're scumbags who want to save money in an industry that it makes hundreds of billions of dollars a year, So, yeah. Lynn Kibblemom, hi Steve, I hope all is well with you. A few weeks ago, I asked you about the member hangout, which, as I said, I haven't always been able to watch. I've been thinking about a member that I haven't seen since early last year, although since I missed several of the recent hangouts, he may have been on since then. I don't remember his name, but he called in from Russia. After the last time I saw him, a military draft was announced in Russia, and many men fled the country to avoid it. Another member asked if anyone had heard from him after that, and someone said they had and that he was not subject to the draft. I haven't heard anything else about him since then, and I wondered if there is any more recent news you can share about him. Thanks. P.S. I apologize if he has been on the hangout and I just didn't recognize him. My memory for names has always been shitty, and now my memory for faces is joining it. Sigh. Well, I have not kept in touch with him. You're thinking of Vovacat, aka Vladimir. And the last I heard, he is still okay. I think someone updated us on his status, not this most recent hangout, but maybe in last month's. I remember his name coming up and someone saying I heard from him recently and he's still okay. So last I heard, he's still okay. But like I said, I'm not the best person to ask because I have not kept in personal contact with him. But yeah, as far as I know, he's still okay. So and thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. And I'm sure if he sees this, he appreciates it. If you watch this, Vladimir, we're still thinking about you. And I hope you're okay. Next question. Oh, here we go. David Colby. David Colby, the Terminator of hating on Strange New Worlds. If you held a gun to my head and asked me to write the Gorn for Strange New Worlds, here's what I'd do. The Gorn are undergoing their version of the eugenics wars. Think about it. This ties into La'an and Number One's backstory and provides a reason why the Gorn monster of the week's biology makes no fucking sense. And you can have scary monsters without making an entire species inherently evil. Also, you can have episodes about failed Gorn experiments, runaway Gorn experiments, Gorn civilians, Gorn dissidents, super smart Gorn, super psychic Gorn, whatever you want. Now you may say, but wait, that breaks TOS canon. Well, you should have fucking thought of that before you decided to use the Gorn, you incompetent hacks. You could have just named them something new, like, I don't know, the Magog, to use a completely random name as an example. But the gutless, money-pinching cowards were too scared people wouldn't watch. That's why there's Scotty and fucking Cybok. Desperation and pandering. I cannot tell you how funny it is that you accuse Strange New Worlds of pandering when I happen to know that you love Lower Decks as much as you do, and Lower Decks is Star Trek pandering the series. I see nothing wrong with your proposal here. I mean, the only thing I would say to counter it is I don't think it's necessary, because I don't see anything wrong with the way the Gorn have been used up to this point. But there's nothing wrong with your proposal here. You can still have the Gorn be scary monsters without being inherently evil by just writing them that way, which I think they have started to. I think in the most recent episode, in the season finale, they dropped little hints that they might be going in that direction, with La'an saying that, the Gorn young are not behaving the way they typically behave, and Pike, Pike first being challenged on his attitude that they're just monsters by Admiral April, who says monster is just what we call things we don't understand. And then Pike himself, after La'an notices that the Gorn young are behaving strangely on the planet, Pike himself saying, maybe they aren't what we think they are. Maybe there is some way to communicate with them. So I feel like the show is moving that way already. The show is not telling us, as a matter of fact, that the Gorn are inherently evil. The Starfleet characters, who have had very limited interactions with the Gorn, are reacting to them in that way and calling them inherently evil or calling them monsters, because that has been their experience with them thus far. The door is still open for that perception to change. And like I said, it's, given the little hints they dropped in episode 10 of season 2, it seems like they may be taking tentative steps in that direction. Now, we shall see. But yeah, I mean, I think you know how I feel about this. To me, I don't have a single issue with how the Gorn have been portrayed in Strange New World so far. But your idea, yes, there are some interesting potential there. You could have Gorn genetic engineering and have different kinds of Gorn show up. That would be fine. I just personally don't think that it's necessary, and that I would never be the one to say, but wait, that breaks canon. I would never say that. Oh, you can't do that. That breaks canon. I could not give it less of a shit. General contact unit problem child. So I've not woken my dad in the middle of the night in a while, but I'm still dealing with depression and anxiety. Last night I sent him a drunk text, and I feel like his response to it really shows how he views the world. I said, sometimes I get depressed when I walk by my old school because I see the line of trees, all the kids aside from me planted because I got in trouble that day. His response was, we can plant a tree if you want. I wasn't sharing that story because I want to plant a tree. I was just telling him about a thing that depresses me sometimes, but in his head, I said, I'm upset I didn't get to plant a tree, so that must mean I want to plant a tree. Like, in his world, if someone tells you they're upset about, there's something upsetting them, one, they must want you to offer a solution, and two, that solution must be a relatively straightforward thing you can just do or buy. Do you know anyone who has that very basic practical understanding of human emotion? If yes, are they also a male boomer? I know several people who would probably respond in that way, including myself. Now, the difference is I know that it is not always a good response. I know that there are many times when, like, as you just said, you weren't sharing it to say, I would like to plant a tree. You were just expressing something. You were just sharing something with him that makes you sad, just to share it, not to solicit a solution. And I have, learned that over the years, and have realized that sometimes offering a solution to someone who says something like that is not only not called for, but is often counterproductive. Like, that's not why they're doing it. And if you offer them, like, if you said that to me and I said, well, we could plant a tree if you wanted, even though I may be saying it with the best of intentions, actually wanting to help you and saying, well, maybe planting a tree will make you feel better, so let's do that, right? I'm not trying to be a smartass or trying to say it like, well, maybe we can plant a tree if you want, like I may be sincerely trying to make you feel better, but that's not what you want. You just want to be able to talk to me. You just want me to listen. And if I'm immediately offering you a solution, it sounds like I wasn't really listening, or that I wasn't listening to listen. I was listening so that I would know how to respond. And that's the wrong thing to do. So, I mean, yeah, I do know people who would potentially respond that way, and I'm one of those people. But I would like to think my understanding of human emotion is not that simplistic, because I realize that that is not the best thing to do, and that is not the way to receive and respond to that kind of a thing when someone tells you something like that. But the instinct is there. Like, I do have that. There is a part of my brain that is a very instinctive problem-solving thing. And if you, or not just you, if anybody expresses something to me that seems to be a problem with a solution, there is a switch that flips in my brain where I'm like, oh, well, we can fix that. Let's just do this, and that'll take care of it. And I recognize that that is a very simplistic way of looking at it. And I recognize that that is a problematic way of looking at it, but I still have that impulse. So yes, I completely understand that. I think the difference is, the important thing is having a self-awareness and realizing that that is an oversimplification in most cases, and that you need to be willing to take a deeper view of things. And when someone tells you something, you need to be able to recognize when they're telling you something just to tell you something, because they just want to share something with you, and they're not looking for an immediate answer or solution. But yeah, I totally get where I think your dad may have been coming from there. I don't know for sure. I don't know how he said it or how he meant it or whatever, but I potentially know what he was trying to do, however misguided it was when he said that to you. Brian Baker. Steve, I started watching Star Trek in syndication back in 1973. For 50 years now, I have seen the best and worst of Star Trek and its fans. Ignoring the people who obsess over continuity, what do you think is the reason that fans concentrate on sets and costumes instead of plot and character development? TOS was a lot of fun for 8-year-old me, and I never was bothered by changes in Klingon appearance or updated special effects because I suspend my disbelief. In 1965, when Star Trek was originally on, we did the best we could with what we had. The sets were plywood, and the gadgets were crude, but why did that matter? It was my willingness to believe that made the show enjoyable. TNG made improvements in special effects, but the show was still character and plot-driven on plywood sets. Are people more interested today in the process of making a product instead of the spirit behind the story? Star Trek is basically Wagon Train to the Stars, so why is how the stories are told more important than why they're told? I mean, there are a couple of different potential answers to this. I mean, obviously, I think you already know. I agree with you. I share your same viewpoint and your same attitude towards it. I am very much a doyleist when it comes to these sorts of things. And you don't have to choose. You can be both. You can be a Watsonian and a doyleist. They're both valid perspectives, and they're both useful ways of looking at things depending on what kind of answer you're looking for. But but I naturally tend to be a doylist, and a doylist is someone who looks at things from an external perspective and says, well, if there is an inconsistency between this story and that story that take place within the same fictional universe, if you can explain that inconsistency by some external explanation, you know, like, well, these stories were written 20 years apart and the writer maybe just forgot a detail, or the writer intentionally changed this because it better served the story they were writing now and they didn't care that it contradicted something in the previous story. Like, that's all the explanation I need. I don't need a Watsonian explanation for things. Because, as I say quite often, it's just a made-up TV show. And as long as my disbelief can be suspended by the show that I'm watching right now, I don't care about stuff that happens outside of it. You know, so I watch the Klingons in Star Trek, the original series, and they look the way they do. I see Klingons in Star Trek, the Next Generation, or the movies or whatever, and they look the way they do. And I never once would have ever thought, gosh, I wonder why they look different. I know why they look different. Like, I don't need to know why they look different in the show. I know why they look different because the makeup is different and it's a made-up TV show. And it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the show at all. But not everybody's like that, you know. Things like the sets and the special effects are easier to sort of put your finger on. They're more concrete. They're flatter. They're shallower. They are not as open to interpretation, so they're easier to get your head around. And some people like that. Some people don't like having to think about things and interpret things and exercise, like, you know, media comprehension and that thing. Some people really don't like anything that reminds them that it's a TV show. Like, they demand, like, their suspension of disbelief is so fragile that anything that breaks the immersion ruins it for them. And I am very, very grateful that I happen to not be one of those people, because I think that would be an incredibly miserable way to experience media. Yeah, and I think a lot of fans, a lot of Star Trek fans, a lot of fans of things that have become like their own subgenre, like Star Trek or Star Wars or, you know, certain superhero franchises or things like that. They're used to thinking of it as Star Trek, and they are not accustomed to thinking of it, or in some cases, they are even downright hostile to the idea of thinking of it as a TV show, like any other TV show, or a movie like any other movie. Like, none of the things that any Star Trek show has done in terms of changing the look of things, changing costume designs, changing character designs, changing the aesthetic of the show, doing all of this without any kind of on-screen explanation. Like, these are all things that have all been done countless times before by other movies and TV shows without incident and without complaint. And yet, for some reason, when Star Trek does it, there's a certain segment of the fan base that erupts. Why does everything look different? Right? With a show that did not have as dedicated of a fan base, and that had not been established as sort of, it had not taken up residence in its own little corner of entertainment. So like, oh, this is Star Trek, this is its own thing. That would never happen. You know, I don't remember anybody, and I've used this as an example, and I think this is a good example. I don't remember, I mean, there were people who had, when Val Kilmer took over for Michael Keaton as Batman in Batman Forever, he's playing the same character. Batman Forever is a sequel to Batman Returns and Batman. So that Bruce Wayne is the same Bruce Wayne as Batman Returns and Batman, right? It's the same character, just played by a different actor. And it's the same fictional universe. It's just interpreted by a different director, Joel Schumacher instead of Tim Burton. So things look different, and there's a slightly different aesthetic. But it's supposed to be the same world. It's in the same timeline, the same fictional universe as Batman Returns, right? Just as Batman Returns is in the same fictional universe as Batman, even though it looks a little different because Tim Burton applied a different aesthetic to it than he did to the first Batman. So like, these are artistic choices, right? These are creative choices, and they don't demand any on-screen explanation because there are artistic choices made by the filmmakers. And in the case of the casting, it's, well, Michael Keaton didn't want to do it anymore, so they replaced him with Val Kilmer. I don't remember anybody going to see Batman Forever when it came out in the theaters in 1995. And regardless of their opinion of the film, whether they thought it was great or they thought it was the shits or they thought it was somewhere in between, I don't remember anybody ever saying, why did Batman look different? Why did Bruce Wayne look different? He looks different than he looked in the last movie. They never explained that. Nobody brought that up. It would have been asinine to bring that up. It's a silly complaint. Just like, why does the Batmobile look different? The Batmobile looks different in this one than it does in the last one. The Batcave doesn't look the same. The Batcave looked like that in Batman Returns, and it's just a few years later, and now in Batman Forever, the Batcave looks completely different. Nobody said anything that I can recall in 1995. Nobody said a fucking thing about that because everybody knew why, and everybody was aware enough to realize, oh, it's the same version of the character and it's the same world, but it's being displayed. It's being presented in a different way because this is a different movie made by different people with different ideas, right? No reason why Star Trek shouldn't be allowed to do the exact same thing. But when Star Trek does it, like I said, there's that certain portion of the fan base that just throws a hissy fit over every little change that isn't specifically explained on screen. Is, okay, here's why things look different now. Everybody relax, right? And it's really fucking annoying. But yeah, there you go. Mark says, have you ever considered the difference between the way people with STEM educations view Star Trek versus those without STEM educations? I'd be interested in hearing your take on the subject. I've never thought of that. I suppose maybe they would just, they would respond to different parts of the show. Maybe they would be more interested in the scientific or quasi-scientific concepts. I mean, it's Star Trek, so it's never been hard science fiction. The scientific content has always been incredibly fantastic and, you know, not all that realistic. But perhaps if you had a STEM education and that was where your interest lies, you would respond to those parts of the show more strongly than others. Like, I know for me, I do not have a particular STEM education. I was an English major. So I tend to look at things like that. That's why I look at things as a writer and as a critic. And I view it as, I look at the way the episodes are structured and how the characterization is accomplished and, you know, things like that. And I don't really care as much about the technical minutia or, you know, the continuity and the canon and all that, the lore and all that stuff. I care about the writing of the show and the filmmaking, the visual presentation, like the storytelling. That's where where my interest lies. And that's the perspective that I usually take when I talk about it. But when I was a kid, especially, and even to this day, but really especially when I was a kid, I loved the space program. I loved the space shuttle. I loved astronauts. And that is still a very strong point of contact for me with Star Trek. So whenever I see characters in Star Trek doing what I call astronaut shit, when they're doing like a scientific mission, or when you see them in spacesuits and they're doing a spacewalk, or you do catch like a little nugget of real science that gets dropped in there where they refer to like a real celestial object instead of like a made up subspace thing, or they refer to like a real concept in science that is actually a thing in astronomy, like gravitational lensing or something. Like, even though it's usually used in the episode in a way that it couldn't be used in real life, like just the fact that they mention like, oh, a coronal mass ejection, like that's a real thing. It probably doesn't work the same way that it works in the episode, but it's a real thing that they referenced, right? So I recognize stuff like that and I appreciate it. And people without that pre-existing interest in space and astronomy and NASA and human space exploration probably wouldn't notice it that much or be that impressed by it or compelled by it. So yeah, I guess it just means that they would respond to different, pieces of Star Trek. Thomas J. Wright, Black Body Economics. Steve, something positive today. After I got hit with the trauma train, I started drinking, like a lot. At one point, I was putting down a half gallon per day. Good Lord. Recently, I picked up a very small dose of psilocybin, just enough to loosen the mind, but not enough to trip balls, and spent a few hours meditating on my newfound addiction. Since that day, I have not had a single craving, not even kind of. The shit is magic. How does this social ignorance propagate and sustain itself in our modern info-driven world? Why are so many still so shut off to accepting these medicines? Any thoughts on the matter? Know anybody who's benefited? I don't know anybody who's benefited personally, but I think a lot of it is just for the last several decades, there has been so much misinformation and alarmism put out into the culture about drugs in general and, hallucinogens in particular. And I think a lot of people are just automatically closed off to the idea that a particular kind of drug, if administered in a very specific targeted way and in a controlled way, can have a benefit, even though if abused, it could lead to something bad, right? I mean, I know there are people who talk about, you gotta use hallucinogens, man. Like it'll open up your mind, like it's still the 60s or something. Like there are people who, just like there are people who think that pot is like magic. There are people who think that magic mushrooms are magic, right? Like, and they think it will solve all your problems. They're on the other side. They're just as ridiculous as the people who are completely closed off to it. There's a middle ground, I feel, for a lot of these substances where, if it is used in a limited way, in a targeted way, in a specific way, it can have some real benefits. I think there's scientific evidence to support that. And I think your experience anecdotally supports that. Like you said, you took a little bit of it, not enough to start fucking rolling, right? But just enough to open you up to some things, and it seems to have really helped. And I'm so glad to hear that. That's fantastic. And yeah, I think a lot of it is just it's ignorance, and it's a lot of assumptions based on decades and decades of alarmist fear mongering about these sorts of things, and a lot of one-dimensional thinking, like, well, if it's bad in this context, then it can't possibly be good in another context. Or if it's bad when you use it this way, you can't possibly use it in another way that could be good. I think it's a lot of that. Mad Brad Freeman, forgive me if this has been asked, but are you and Jason planning to make any changes to the Ensigns Log to reflect the subtle Strange New World changes to the timeline? No. But having said that, we have put in references in the past to things that do come from Discovery and Strange New Worlds, not from Star Trek the original series. Like, we've done that before in one of our early seasons. There was a storyline where Steve and Jason worked with Section 31, and we had Section 31 uniforms with the black comm badges that you could, tap and communicate with, like Section 31 is shown to have in Discovery. We had those, and we referenced those. And just recently, actually, I made a reference. It was in the most recent episode that we released. Jason is complaining about 10 Forward on the Enterprise D, and I bring up the crew lounge on the old Enterprise, on Kirk's Enterprise, which we see in Strange New Worlds. It became like a recurring setting in season 2 of Strange New Worlds. It's like a bar. And Jason and I both, in talking about it, after having watched the show, we both really like that set, and we both think it seems like a much nicer space for people on a starship to hang out in than 10 Forward. It's just a lot more visually interesting, and it has the bar in the middle instead of against one wall. It's just a much more three-dimensional, interesting space. And you never saw that space in Star Trek the original series. Like, that set didn't exist. That's something that was created just for the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise, but it's supposed to be the same Enterprise. So when Steve and Jason, our characters on the show, were serving on Captain Kirk's Enterprise, presumably that space was there. So I referenced it. I referred to it. I say, it's 10 forward is okay. It's not as good as the crew lounge on the old Enterprise. So we have made references to things that we would have experienced while we were on the ship back in the TOS era, but that are not drawn specifically from TOS, that are drawn from Strange New Worlds or Discovery. So we've done things like that. And, if the opportunity arises to do that again, I wouldn't not do it, because there's no reason not to do it. But we're not going to specifically make any changes to the show or introduce anything to account for changes from Strange New Worlds, because it's not really what our show is. Our show has never been particularly, we try to get things right. We try not to flagrantly violate canon with our show, but ultimately our show is not concerned with either violating or upholding Star Trek canon. Our show is about our stuff, and it just happens to exist in the Star Trek world, but it's our own characters and our own stories happening alongside the stuff that happened in the shows. So that's all. The stuff that happened in the shows is kind of background to us. But yeah, we've made reference to Strange New Worlds specific stuff before. Agent Meister, who is just not thinking fourth dimensionally. Peldor Joy Steve, a few askaways ago, I asked you about the Back to the Future trilogy in general, but today I want to focus on the ending of Part 3, especially the Deus Ex Machina that is the time train. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm nitpicking. I love every frame of these movies since I first saw them and wouldn't change a thing, but Doc's return at the end has always puzzled me. It practically negates everything he and Marty did to get back to 1985 throughout the movie. And even though Doc has been committed to destroying the DeLorean because of the dangers of time travel since halfway through Part 2, it's okay to do it now in this flying locomotive? An example of thematic dissonance, no. IDW published a story about this a while back. It was a good yarn, but a film should be judged by what's on the screen and not in conjunction with glorified fan fiction published 25 years later. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and maybe you could shed some light on something I missed. Well, no, I don't think you missed anything. I think it is a contradiction, but I think they did it to give the trilogy a memorable ending and to end on a memorable image and a clever image, Doc Brown went back to the Old West to settle down and get married and raise a family, and eventually he built a new time machine, and he didn't have a DeLorean to build a time machine out of back then, so he built a time machine out of a locomotive. And yes, it does contradict his desire to destroy the time machine and everything, but then again, Doc reading the letter as revealed at the end of Back to the Future Part 1 contradicts something he said. Like younger Doc from 1955 states pretty clearly, I cannot read the letter that you have written me, Marty, warning me about the future because that would jeopardize the timeline, and I refuse. I will not do it under any circumstances. And then he does it. So, Back to the Future Part 3, Doc has been talking about, I must destroy that infernal time machine. When we get back to 1985, I'm going to destroy this infernal time machine. He seems really determined. And then he doesn't. Or he goes back to the Old West and, he builds a new one out of a train. He changed his mind. So it doesn't present a problem for me. And I think the main reason it's there is, again, because it's a nice ending image. It's like, oh, he went back to the Old West and now he has an Old West time machine and that's the end. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. So, and I'm not familiar with the IDW story that you're talking about. I haven't read any of the Back to the Future comics, so I don't know what it says or anything about that. But yeah, I don't think it's a contradiction in a way, but it doesn't bother me. Wolfie Basach, hi Steve, I hope you'll forgive me, but I want to say something to someone who may be listening tonight, which will then be thinly disguised with a question. Hope it's okay. Last Askaway, you read my question, and for the first time since my balls dropped, I looked at the live chat. Someone seemed to be having a bit of a wild time, and although it wasn't connected to what I'd written, I started to wonder if the nature of my question might inadvertently cause issues for them. I just want to say that just in case it did cause offense, please may they accept my apologies. Anyway, having gotten that off my chest, I'll be back to stupid mode next time with a rescheduled question relating to my encounter with a beast so darkly terrifying that viewer discretion and spare underpants will be advised. Right, a quick one for tonight. Okay, for the sake of a question, if you really, really had to choose out of Trump and DeSantis, which one wakes up with a rubber cock? I mean, I feel like it's dollars to donuts that DeSantis has one already. I mean, I feel like his face is made out of rubber, the way he makes those weird faces, you know. So, I don't know. I don't know. Who would do the least amount of damage? I mean, I don't know. It's problematic any way I choose to go with this. I think it would probably hurt Trump's ego the most. So I would go with Trump because I feel like Trump fancies himself a ladies' man, even though there's no evidence that he is such a thing and never has been, but at least not consensually. So I would give Trump the rubber cock because I feel like it would be the most disturbing to him. Yeah. And thank you for that. I don't know what you're referring to because I wasn't looking at the chat either. But if you did hurt somebody's feelings or upset somebody, I think that's nice of you to be sensitive to that and apologize. And hopefully they, saw the apology and maybe it meant something to them. So that's very nice. Some random geek who has an idea. Okay, Joanna needed money this week, as she always does, especially at the end of the month, but I was tapped out because of upcoming patron charges. Some of my patron charges help those in need, like Phoenix and Joey, but she doesn't know what to do if she doesn't get the money for food and the necessary cab rides, so I am paid on the 1st this Friday. As well, my patron charges hit my Chase credit card, so I gave money to Joanna. I'm going to stay up on Thursday night into Friday morning. Once my direct deposit hits my checking account, I will schedule a payment to my Chase card. Hopefully my direct deposit hits before my patron charges hit the Chase card, because if it doesn't, then I don't know what would happen if Patreon is unable to charge the Chase card. Can I have Patreon attempt to charge again after I schedule my payment once I know I got my direct deposit? I will see. But this is what I might have to do to make sure Joanna has the money she needs. Sorry, no question. And I saw you mentioned in the chat earlier, Geek, that you figured out something with this. You did something different, and apparently it worked out. So I'm glad to hear that. But I believe you can. I don't think I've ever had to do this, but I believe if the card that you have set to be charged for your Patreon pledges is declined, you can have it. You can do like a recharge, I think, but I'm not positive. Like you can manually have Patreon charge you again for that month's pledges, I think, but I'm not. Don't hold me to that because I'm not sure, and don't ask me what the mechanics of it are because I've never done it. But I believe that is an option. Stephen G. Clenard, hey Steve, sorry man. This ask away, I got nothing. I started writing a question about the actors and writers strikes, but it was bland and boring and just a bunch of blah, 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 and I couldn't find a setup for my single lame, half-baked gag. But I don't owe you nothing, man. And here I am giving myself a hard time for not providing you with easy pay-to-play filler content that nobody else pays attention to because the live chat is busy talking about anime Doctor Who or some such bullshit. What a scam. Anyway, I am looking forward to your review of the Paramount Plus special presentation of Robert Beltran's one-man play, I, Chipotle. You got it in there. You got it in there. Yeah, I guess if they don't settle the strike soon, then the streaming services will just be shifting to 100% scab-only content. So Robert Beltran will finally, he'll be able to sell whatever project he's, had in his desk drawer all these years that he's never gotten anybody to get a look at. Yeah. I, Chipotle. I mean, I probably wouldn't watch it, but, might be interesting. Well, maybe I could watch it if I could find it. I mean, like I am a Paramount Plus subscriber, but if they put out a show specifically like by and starring Robert Beltran, I would feel kind of bad about watching that because, he did kind of give the finger to the strike not too long ago. But maybe if I could pirate a copy, if I could find like a copy of it that somebody had uploaded to the Pirate Bay or something, I could watch it that way, and then I could make fun of it without having to, reconcile the fact that I watched it on Paramount Plus and probably put, not very much, a teensy-tiny residual into his pocket, but nevertheless. Michael Ridra is back with one last question about my adventures with Superman. Hey, Steve, just watched the finale of season 1 of My Adventures with Superman, and my goodness, what a ride. Of course, now I'm super bummed, knowing it may be a very long time before we get season 2. If studio execs could stop being huge assholes, that'd be super swell. When do you think you'll do a review of this show? What did you think of the finale? Having finished season 1, how would you compare this Superman to all the other Superman shows and movies? I know that's multiple questions, but they're all related, so kind of one question, right? I'm really looking forward to more of this show. Here's hoping season 2 happens in my lifetime, but only after execs concede to the WGA and SAG. I know animation is under a different guild, so I don't know if it will be as long of a wait as you might think, but I really don't know. But no, I thought the season finale was terrific. I liked it a lot. I thought the way that they tied things together with the father's angle was very clever. That other shoe that we've all been waiting to drop, that we all kind of suspected, did drop very satisfyingly in terms of the identity of a particular character. And I really liked the way that played out and the way they kind of teased it leading up to it. Like, okay, y'all know what's coming, right? Here's a little bit more. Okay, boom, there it is. I thought that was really well done. Yeah, I really like the way they used kryptonite in this. It's a slightly different way of using kryptonite than we've seen in the past. I thought it was a really solid ending to a very solid season. I like that they kind of did the multi-part episode right before this. So the season finale was just a single episode that tied up story arcs that have been going throughout the season, but it wasn't the end of a proper two-parter. It was its own standalone episode that just, resolved story threads that have been drawn throughout the season. So I like that, but it's just such a good goddamn show, isn't it? I mean, I don't know when I'll be making a video about it. I need to think about what specifically I want to say. I don't think I want to do just a straight review video of it. I want to try to come up with an angle on it. But I mean, I will certainly do a review or do a video of some kind about it at some point, because I really, really like it. And as far as where does it rank among other Superman shows? It ranks really high. I would put it, I mean, it's in a totally different way. It's right up there alongside Superman and Lois for me. And I've really, really enjoyed Superman and Lois so far too. And this is a drastically different take on the character than that. But that's what I like about it. I like that there are 2 Superman-centered TV shows, one live action, one animated, and they're both excellent, and they're both so different, with different approaches to the character, different focuses, different tones, and I just think it's fantastic. And My Adventures with Superman it's one of my favorite versions of Superman that I have seen in many years. I'll put it that way. I'm not sure if I would put it as high as like Christopher Reeve and George Reeves and the Fleischer cartoons. I don't think it's quite to that level yet, after just one 10-episode season, but it's really good. It's really, really good. And it's fun, and it's inventive, and it feels genuinely fresh. It feels like they have actually found fresh spins on these very old, very familiar characters and new ways to employ these very familiar tropes. And it's funny, and I love the characters, and I love the writing, and it's a great show. If anybody hasn't seen it yet, if anybody hasn't watched My Adventures with Superman, now the entire full 10-episode first season is out, and I cannot recommend it highly enough to you if you haven't watched it yet. It's terrific. Joe McClory, you might remember my last question referenced the Oliver Anthony song. Since then, he has made some statements that seem to indicate that his read on the plight of the working class may be better than I thought. Well, that is the closest I will get to taking back my take, because that was a painfully muddy way to present his message, and message clarity is not a responsibility of listeners. Are there any videos or blogs that you remember taking down because you had been unclear and you did not want to have an easily misread message out there? I can't think of anything that I've ever taken down for that reason, but I have changed things during the during the writing or even sometimes the editing process because I was worried that might be an issue. There have been videos that I have, especially if I've done like an off the cuff unscripted video, and then I'm looking at it and editing it, and there have been times where I have lifted parts out. I mean, a lot of times when I edit those videos and there's jump cuts and stuff, I take stuff out just because it doesn't work for, one of a million different reasons, or because I think the video is too long and it would be better without this. But there have been times where I've taken things out because I've been concerned that it would be taken the wrong way, or that I wasn't expressing the point I meant to express as clearly as I wanted to, or as I felt I needed to. So, I mean, I have made changes to things for that reason. I just can't think of any time I've actually put something up and it's been out and then I've taken it down for that. But yes, clarity is important, and you are absolutely right. I agree with you. Message clarity is not the responsibility of the listeners. You cannot control how your work is received. You cannot help people jumping to the wrong conclusions or misinterpreting or coming at you in bad faith. You can't avoid any of that. There will always be people who honestly don't get what you're saying, or who are intentionally acting like they don't get what you're saying to serve some agenda of their own. And that's not your responsibility as the storyteller or the writer or the presenter or whatever. But it is your responsibility to make sure that if you have a point to make, you are making that point as clearly as you can, so that any reasonable and reasonably well-informed person would understand what you mean. That is absolutely your responsibility. And that is a responsibility that Oliver Anthony utterly failed to meet in that song. I think it's really nice that he said the things he said, and that he pushed back at the song being so warmly embraced by right-wingers. I think it's nice that he said, hey, I was writing it about you guys, right? I think that's very nice that he said that. Doesn't change the fact that the song refers in a derogatory fashion to, people on welfare eating fudge rounds by the bag, or people being taxed too much, or all of these, talking points that anyone who had, half a fucking brain and had been paying attention at all to the political discourse in this country knows are talking points that will resonate with right-wing audiences. Like, people on the left aren't complaining about taxes and people on welfare, all right? And they're not choosing to frame their arguments in favor of the working class in that way. If his idea was, I want to speak for the working class against the elite, well, if the elite that you are targeting were those right-wingers who loved your song, you didn't do a very good fucking job writing your song, dude. Sorry. It's a lot of the responsibility, most of the responsibility, I would say, falls on him, because I even went back and reread the lyrics today after you submitted your question, there, just to make sure. Maybe I misinterpreted, maybe I didn't hear something right. Maybe I misinterpreted something he said in the song. I went back and I read the lyrics, and I'm like, nope. It's his fault. I'm glad that he said what he said, but the song still says what it says. And it still appeals to the people it appeals to, and I can see why. So that's on him. Russell, good evening, Steve. I feel like I strongly disagree with your position on this topic. What topic, you might ask? Who was Star Trek's best first officer? While you went with Riker, I have to say he has some strikes against him that I don't have with Spock. One in particular, his extreme bias toward those he feels threatened by, like Commander Shelby or Captain Jellicoe, or even his transporter twin, the other Riker. Spock never showed such bias, I don't think. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me on this. Now, I am not current on Strange New Worlds, so my judgment on the first officer is not fair, but Riker, come on. I know my opinion is subjective. Anyway, doesn't mean I'm right, but if you conclude that Riker is the best despite his biased behavior, what's that say about Spock? I personally think Spock was the best first officer because he was willing to assume command, act within structure, and had the best intentions to succeed in any mission. Anyways, what do you think? I meant to post on your review. Well, the whole point of doing that first officer video was, or the beyond me just getting to make a video that will hopefully be entertaining and funny and enjoyable for people to watch, and to get to make my little jokes and give my little Star Trek opinions, the the real use of videos like that to other people is to evoke conversation. So if you disagree with me and you think that Riker is not the best first officer, that it's actually Spock, that's great. That's, that kind of discussion is part of the value of videos like that, because just because I say it's Riker, that as you say in your question, it's subjective. It's not a fact. It's not a fact that anybody is the best first officer in Star Trek. That's an opinion. So you having a different opinion than me is completely fine. And you take issue with the fact that Riker, acts a little fussy sometimes, with people like Shelby going around him to go to Captain Picard instead of following the proper procedure and taking her plan to the captain through Riker like you're supposed to. And he has a problem with Jellicoe because Jellicoe's command style is very different than Picard's, and Riker is used to Picard. And that's really the heart, I think, of their conflict. That and Riker's loyalty to Picard makes him very, very sensitive to the idea that Jellicoe is not going to help Picard when they find out that Picard has been captured. Like, Riker loves Picard and is loyal to Picard and is like, we need to go get him. We need to save him. And Jellicoe is the more detached one who is like, we can't do that. If doing that, we'll risk a war with the Cardassians, which is the entire thing we're here to try and prevent. So I see that from Riker's side. Like, I see it from Jellicoe's side as well. And I think it's wrong to vilify Jellicoe for doing what he does. But I also kind of think it's wrong to vilify Riker for doing what he does, because he's loyal to Captain Picard. And it's understandable that he would be. He has been Picard's first officer at that point for close to 6 years. So he would be loyal to Captain Picard. And Captain Picard seems like a good dude and the kind of person who would inspire loyalty, especially from those who are close to him, like Riker. So I don't blame Riker for that. And I don't take points off for that, metaphorically speaking. And I don't think that indicates that he is a bad first officer or a less suitable first officer. But if you do, that's fine. That's your opinion. That's not even so much that I disagree with you. I just take a different view of it. And what does it say about Spock? I don't know. I mean, I think Spock, as I say in the video, I think Spock was a terrific first officer. And since Spock was the first officer that we really got to know in Star Trek, he set the mold that the other first officers followed. It's his footsteps that the other first officers are following. So I think Spock is a terrific first officer. And if you say that you think he was the best, I'm certainly not going to try to change your mind because I think Spock was terrific. Scott P. Hey, Steve. Forgot to come up with a good question, so here's 2 mediocre questions. Jazz, scatting, and cheese whiz. Which one is closer in quality to the bodily function it shares a partial name with? Second question, how about them Orioles? First place. Yankees are in the cellar. Are you following them this year? If so, looking forward to the playoffs? That's all I got. I got to say cheese whiz is closer to whiz than jazz scatting is to scat, because I am a fan of jazz. I like jazz, and I would not want to insult jazz scat singing by saying that it is more like scat as in shit than cheese whiz is like whiz as in piss. I just don't think that would be very nice to jazz. I would not wish to insult jazz in that way. So I'll say cheese whiz is closer to the thing that its name shares a bodily function with. And yeah, how about them Orioles? They are, the race is tightening. They're only a game and a half up. The Rays are nipping at their heels, but the Orioles are still in first place in the AL East, and they have been for quite a while. It's been a very disconcerting season. I mean, in a good way, because usually what happens is when the Orioles start off really well, they have a good April, maybe a good May, and then they just fall off a cliff. And that has not happened. Here we are. It's the 1st of September, and they're still in first place, and they've been in first place for most of the season. And for certain periods, they've been like solidly in first place. And I believe they still have the best record in all of the American League, and they have the second best record in all of baseball after the Atlanta Braves. So, I mean, it's been great. It's been great. And I do feel like they're almost, unless they completely collapse, if they just completely fell apart and lost every game from now to the end of the season, I think it is still mathematically possible for them to not make the postseason, but I don't think that's going to happen. So it'll be nice to be able to watch postseason baseball this year, and if the Orioles are in it, I will make an effort to watch, the division series in the LCS, and yeah, it'll be nice to watch postseason baseball and have the Orioles in there at least for a little while. I haven't been able to do that since 1997, so I will definitely be watching the O's in the postseason if fingers crossed if they do make it, which it seems like they will. So yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. Matt L. So I finally watched The Flash on Max. Besides some horrible looking CGI cameos, literally, how did that get past any quality control? It was an okay film. As someone who read the original Flashpoint, I really wish they leaned into that. Supergirl was a fine change, but the two Barrys just seemed silly. I went in hoping that Batman would be the same as Flashpoint as a fake-out with Keaton, but was left disappointed. The first 30 minutes dragged for me, and apparently that's what the reshoots were for. Overall, for me, 7 out of 10. It could have been worse. At least no one screamed Martha. What are your thoughts, Steve? Have you seen Blue Beetle? I'm going to wait for Max. P.S. The last before credit scene was what brought it up from a 6 for me. So the ending, like before the credits, when the super surprise cameo happens, that was all right, I guess. It was a clever idea. I don't know how well they executed it, but it was a clever idea. I think 7 out of 10 is awfully high for me. I didn't think the Flash movie was good, but at the same time, I didn't think it was terrible either. I actually have a video coming out next week about it. I've written it. I'm shooting it tomorrow. I'm doing a little video essay about the Flash movie and kind of what the deal is with it and why I think it was such a box office disaster and why it's gotten such negative reviews. And I think there are a lot of factors at play there, some of which have to do with the content of the film and some of which have to do with things happening around the movie and the culture. There's a good movie in there somewhere. I'll put it that way. There's a good movie in there somewhere about the Flash. And my biggest problem with the movie is that there's about an hour and a half of it that feels like it's not about the Flash. It's a 2.5 hour movie. There's about an hour that feels like it's about the Flash and that feels compelling, or at least like it could potentially be compelling if presented in a better way, that has an emotional core that makes sense, that ties into the Flash and feels of that character. It feels like it could have been the heart of a good superhero movie, a good Flash movie. And then we leave that off to the side so we can go have a Batman and Supergirl and General Zod movie for about an hour. And it's like, why didn't you do a Flash movie? Like, the movie's called The Flash. The most compelling parts of it are the parts that are centered on the Flash. Why did we go off and have this Batman and Supergirl movie for an hour and a half that has nothing to do with anything? That was my big problem. Yes, the CGI looks like shit. A lot of the special effects don't look great. Some people have said that it looks unfinished. I can't speak to that. I don't know if that's the case or not. I don't think it's as bad as some people do. I've heard some people say that it's like the worst superhero movie ever, or at least the worst superhero movie of the current sort of modern era of superhero movies. I don't think it's that bad, but it's not good. I certainly wouldn't say 7 out of 10. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 out of 10 for me. Maybe 4. Yeah, I mean, because I don't really do on a scale of 1 to 10. I think more in terms of a star system. So if I'd give it maybe 2 stars out of 4 or out of 5, something like that. Like, not worst all-time movie level bad, but not great. Most of the time, not even good, but good enough at certain parts that I can't bring myself to just completely trash it. It has moments that really work. It has moments that are really funny. It has moments that are really clever. But like I say, there's just this huge stretch of it that just has nothing to do with anything other than, hey, look, it's Batman. Hey, look, it's Supergirl. Okay, what's it doing in this movie? Yeah. And no, I have not seen the Blue Beetle movie. I'm curious about it, but I will also be waiting for it to come out on streaming to watch that. Sent Merc, hey Steve, did you catch All In? If so, what did you think about the show? Any matches you'd like to talk about? I really enjoyed it myself, and I got this weird sense of pride as an AEW supporter from day one, for my guys managing to have their first WrestleMania, including many wrestlers who've never been on a stage anything like that before. Have any thoughts on the Punk Perry drama at the show, or the All Out card / lack of build? P.S. Please pass along to Dana that I thought she was especially good in the most recent Ensigns Log, bringing a comfort and energy to her character that I greatly appreciated. P.P.S. I submitted a screenplay to the Academy Nickel Fellowship. I didn't make the quarterfinals, but they tell me my movie scored in the top 10%. It's disheartening that I wasn't as good as 364 people, but apparently better than 5,500. Ambivalent feelings of being discouraged and enthused. Well, first of all, congratulations on that, even though you didn't win and you didn't make it past the quarterfinals. Yeah, I understand it's always discouraging when you enter a contest and you don't win, but to hear that you did that well and that your submission was judged as being better than, you know, all but a few hundred submissions, like that is encouraging, and hopefully you will take that as encouragement and continue on. I think that's really cool. So congratulations and thanks for sharing that. And I will pass that along to Dana. She will like to hear that. I agree. I listened to our most recent Ensigns Log episode just yesterday, as a matter of fact. And I think I told Dana after we recorded that episode, I messaged her privately and said, you were really good. Yeah, I mean, I usually think she's good. I think she's good in the show just in general, but I agree. I thought she was very, very good. She had a lot of confidence in her performance that often she doesn't have. I think sometimes she gets in her head a little bit because she is sort of the odd person out, because Jason and I are both huge Star Trek nerds and Dana very much isn't. And Jason and I both tell her, like, that does not matter. It doesn't matter. It makes no difference. Because you don't, I mean, the show is not about reciting Star Trek trivia. Like, you don't need to know Star Trek stuff. If there's a Star Trek thing that you do specifically need to know for the story to make sense, we will tell you. Beyond that, just, you know, get in your character and do your character. And don't worry about the Star Trek stuff. And she did a fantastic job in this most recent episode. I thought she was great. I thought it was, in terms of one of her performance, I thought it was one of her best episodes. So I'm glad you thought so too. And I will definitely pass that along. I only watched 2 matches on All In, and that was the first match and the last match. I watched Punk versus Joe and thought that was very good, although I'm not sure how I feel about the weird Hogan section in the middle of it. It was almost surreal, where it's like they take turns being Hulk Hogan. Where Punk does the it's weird. Like, he gets into it by doing a John Cena. He does the John Cena belly to back slam on Joe, and looks like he's setting up for the "you can't see me." But instead of doing this, he does the Hogan hand cup to the ear, and then he hits the ropes and does the Hogan leg drop, and then he goes for the pin, and then Joe kicks out and does the Hulk up. So it's like the spirit of Hulk Hogan was transferred from CM Punk to Joe through the leg drop, and Joe did the Hulk up, and Punk did the, you know, he punches him and it doesn't hurt him. What am I going to do? And it was just like, I'm not sure how I feel about it. It was unexpected. Let's put it that way. It was unexpected, but they looked like they were having fun, and that's always nice to see. Punk is a great wrestler, especially when you can tell that he is relaxed and he's confident and he's doing what he wants to do, and he knows, like, he's in the zone, which he seems like that most of the time when he wrestles, which is why he's one of my favorite wrestlers, because he just has such relaxation and such confidence in that ring. He's like, I've got this, right? And Joe's the same way. Joe's an absolute pro, and I thought they had a very good match. Not their best match that they've ever had, obviously, but a very solid match. And then I watched the main event, the MJF versus Adam Cole match, and that was really good. I appreciate that they were kind of backed into a corner in terms of the booking, and I feel like they ended it really the best way that they could have. If MJF had turned on Adam, then it would have made Adam Cole look like a complete doofus. It would have made Adam Cole, it would have killed off Adam Cole. If MJF had won the match by turning heel on him after all these weeks, it would have completely killed Adam Cole. It would have made him look like the biggest dipshit imaginable. Like, how could you not have seen this coming? But at the same time, if Adam Cole had won either by turning on MJF or by just winning the match clean and they were still baby faces, then you're ending MJF's world championship reign by having Adam Cole beat him. And I mean, I don't have anything specifically against Adam Cole, but Adam Cole is not the guy right now to beat MJF. He's just not. Like he's not a viable world champion remotely. He's barely a viable world champion, world title contender. Like if they had not done the storyline they did with the two of them becoming best friends leading up to this match, there's no way Adam Cole would have been a credible challenger for MJF or for any world champion in the main event of a show this big. It's just, it's ridiculous. He's not nearly over enough. He's not nearly hot enough. Or at least he wasn't before this MJF storyline. So I don't think it was a viable option to have him win the title under any circumstances. So the best thing to do is to have MJF win and keep the belt and also do it in a way that they're still friends afterwards. And that's what they did. And I thought that came off very good. And I thought the match itself was very good. So there you go. So of the two matches I watched, I enjoyed them both, but those are the only two matches I gave a shit about. So those are the only two matches I watched. As for the Punk Jungle Boy stuff that happened backstage, I'm completely on Punk's side. I'm glad that he choked him out or shoved him or did whatever he did to him. I think if I were Tony Khan and I could get away with firing Jungle Boy, I would have fucking fired him. You know? Like, what a great idea. Let's start. First of all, the conflict between him and Punk is apparently due to the fact that he wanted to do a spot using real glass on an episode of Collision a few weeks ago, and Punk vetoed that and said, we don't do that on this show because A, it's probably dangerous, and B, it's fucking dumb. You know, why are you doing dangerous glass spots to help build up your program with Hook that nobody gives a fuck about? And your match with Hook is on the pre-show of the pay-per-view, and it wasn't booked until the day before the show. Nobody gives a fuck about this match. This is a nothing undercard match. You're lucky to be on the show. Why are you doing fucking garbage match spots on this match? Just have a fucking match and let Hook choke you out and win back his imaginary title like everybody wants. Because nobody gives a fuck about Jungle Boy. Hook actually, I think, has an upside and has a future. I really like Hook a lot. I would love to see him get away from this fucking Jack Perry thing and get on to something better because I like Hook a lot. But Jungle Boy, no. I've never seen it with him in the ring. I've never gotten any of the hype about him as a wrestler. And obviously as a promo and as a gimmick and a character, there's just no charisma there. There's nothing. I mean, he's lucky he has a job. He's lucky he works on the show. And he goes out of his way to piss off CM Punk, a famously thin-skinned and kind of prickish guy who also happens to be the top star in the company. So this little undercard nobody is going to make a point of pissing off the top guy who is already kind of irritable to begin with. And then he's going to start shit with him backstage? Fuck him. Fuck him. So no, I mean, like, I don't know if Tony can actually fire him because of contractual things, but I would take it out more on Jungle Boy than I would on Punk for sure. Yeah. And last question from John Burns. Hi, Steve. What if instead of creating Star Trek, Roddenberry had created the Star Trek Party? What would have happened? In 1966, who knew Johnson, who had started Vietnam, would withdraw from the primaries? I mean, start a war in your first term, win re-election. Then Bobby Kennedy dies, and they go with Johnson's VP. All kinds of crappy things going on. So you're thinking if Gene Roddenberry, who nobody knew who Gene Roddenberry was in 1966. I mean, they may have recognized his name from some credits of some shows he had written on. Maybe a few of the people who actually watched The Lieutenant might have been like, oh, Gene Roddenberry, that guy, isn't he a writer? I think I've seen his name in some credits on some shows, right? He would have started a political party instead of doing Star Trek, and what? That wouldn't have gone anywhere. That wouldn't have gone anywhere. It wouldn't have changed anything about the history of politics in America, and we wouldn't have gotten Star Trek. So, yeah, that's what would have happened. Nobody would remember who Gene Roddenberry was. There would be no Star Trek, and the 1968 election for president would have gone exactly the same way it went. So no, it does bring to mind though something that Jason says sometimes. And I think Jason said it on one of our, maybe on in one of the uncut sections of a recent episode of Late Seating, that if Gene Roddenberry, if they had not brought back Star Trek in the late 70s with Star Trek the Motion Picture, that instead of going back to doing Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry might have just started a cult, because he was giving off kind of cult leader vibes at some of those early Star Trek conventions, because he obviously, he really liked the attention from fans. He really liked being looked up to and being looked to as like a font of knowledge and wisdom and a great creative force. He really got off on that, Gene did. And you can, if you squint and tilt your head to the side, you can kind of see like, oh man, if this Star Trek thing hadn't worked out, like if they hadn't gotten to do movies, I don't know, he might have taken more of an L. Ron Hubbard route, perhaps, it's mostly a joke, but I can kind of see it. You know what I mean? There's an element of what if there. So you remind me of that as far as, what if he had done the Star Trek party instead of creating Star Trek? But if he had gone into politics instead of creating Star Trek, nothing would have happened. He would have made no difference to anything. And now we would not remember who Gene Roddenberry is. All right. That's it for the patron and member questions. Now it is time. I will be turning my attention to the live chat here momentarily, but first, I got to show you guys a brand new Stuffy and Friends short. I have a brand new one ready to go. Again, this one, as always happens with these things, it will go up as a standalone YouTube short on my channel tomorrow afternoon, but you get to see it for the first time here tonight live because you are watching my live stream. So please enjoy the world premiere of a brand new Stuffy and Friends short. Here we go. You know my least favorite part of summer?
The heat?
The heat! But, do you know my favorite part of the heat?
Being able to fry eggs on the driveway?
Close, but no. It's the undeniable pleasure of turning the pillow over to the cool side.
I don't get that. The effect of the cool side of the pillow is a lot less noticeable when you're covered in fur.
Good point. You could always put your pillow in the freezer before bed. I bet then it would be cool enough for you to feel the difference.
Probably, but if I'm going to go to those lengths, I might as well just cut out the middleman and sleep in the freezer.
God, can you imagine how drunk you'd need to be to even think about crawling inside a freezer to sleep?
Oi, shut the door. How the hell am I supposed to sleep with that bloody light on?
Did you know he was there? Ta-da! Jack's back. I know a couple of people have said, are any of the other characters coming back? Is it just going to be Stuffy and Steve, or are any of the other characters going to come back? Jack's back, so Jack will be making occasional appearances in these shorts coming from this point on. He will not be in every single one, but he'll be around. And Radical Bacon, hi! I saw you in the chat before the show started, and I didn't get a chance to say hi, but it's so good to see you. Yes, it has been a minute. I hope everything's okay. Hope everything's going well with you. It's cool to see you. Yeah, Daryl, yes, those are the pizzas that I have on Wednesdays for pizza night when Dana and I watch Trek Reluctantly, or when we do Trek Reluctantly and watch whatever we're watching and we have pizza. Those are my Wednesday night Trek Reluctantly pizzas I got stacked up in there. And John Burns dropped in a super chat that says, Google Bill Peters and his new job in the WHL, #BLM. I'm probably not going to do that, but I appreciate the information for anybody who does want to do that. Let me see what else we got going on here. 255 AD says, the other day I posted a comment to Thomas Smith about how I think Aaron Ra has maybe endorsed Great Replacement in some vids. He reacted badly and I sort of walked it back. Am I a coward? I mean, not having seen exactly what was said on both sides, I don't know whether you were a coward or not. Maybe you just wanted to get out of an awkward situation. I don't think that necessarily makes you a coward. It just means you wanted to back out of something without making things worse, you know? I know Aaron and I have never personally fallen out over anything, but I stopped sort of interacting with him when he stuck beside Rationality Rules, when Rationality Rules started making transphobic videos. And Aaron kind of like embraced him and said, "Oh, he's just being controversial." And I was like, "All right, I'm out." So, I mean, Aaron and I have always gotten along personally, but I haven't watched enough of Aaron's videos to have an opinion on whether or not he has said anything, you know, that could be interpreted as an endorsement of the Great Replacement theory. But I know that his willingness to remain very publicly supportive of a guy who said some really shitty transphobic things did not endear him to me. And it sucked because I really liked Aaron. But, you know, it is what it is. Isaiah says, "Are you a B-52s fan?" A little bit. I wouldn't say I'm like a huge fan of the B-52s. I've really only heard just their radio released stuff. They're, you know, I don't think I've ever bought a B-52s album, but what I've heard of them, I've really liked. Yeah, I like the B-52s. David Colby says, "I do promise I will have non-Strange New Worlds related questions in the future." Well, that's up to you, my friend. That's a decision that you have to make. And I just realized I don't have the chat up on screen. There we go. I'm sure somebody will say something about it at some point. And look how tiny the print is. I need to fix that. Let's try this. Is that any better? Let's try this. There, now it's kind of more readable. Let's try that. Whoa, that's way too big. Let's try that. There we go. Maybe that. Okay. Let's just do that. Yeah, so anyway. Yeah, Stephen, it is good to know that Stuffy has more than just one friend. It would be really sad if I was the only one he got to hang out with, right? Brian Baker says, "There was an author, Rex Stout, who wrote a series of mystery novels and referred to the office address by 2 different numbers in the same novel." Yeah, like, I mean, if it was a good novel, I wouldn't care. Like, if I was interested in the story and the characters, I wouldn't give a shit. Daryl Lett says, "When it comes to jazz, are there certain situations where you enjoy it more? To me, it's got to be nighttime, especially with cool jazz like Herbie Mann, Ramsey Lewis Trio, etc." Oh, sure. I mean, I guess, you know, like I'm a white liberal, so I have had the experience of like turning on the public radio station, you know, after like 9 or 10 o'clock and listening to when they just play jazz all night. Like, I have done that, and I do sort of, you know, subconsciously associate jazz with, like, you know, late night type stuff. So yeah, I agree. I mean, if you're listening to jazz at like, I mean, I've never listened to jazz in the early morning while making breakfast. I assume it would be a pleasant experience if you're listening to good jazz that you enjoy. But there is something about jazz that puts you in the mood for, you know, the late night. It's dark out, you know, and you're doing nighttime stuff, you know? Yeah. The sun's not out when the jazz is playing. Darren Domina says, "Hi, Steve. Strange New Worlds isn't perfect, but it's well acted and generally pretty good. Why do you think there seems to be so much vocal bashing of it on YouTube? It's like they go out of their way to hate it." Well, I think it depends on what they're bashing. Like my very good friend David Colby, who is in the chat. He objects to it for reasons that, like, he just in the chat now, he just called it right wing, which I think is insane. I don't see it that way at all. He sees the show in a completely different way than I do. I don't think the show is remotely right wing at all. But he genuinely believes that, and that is his sincere opinion. And that is a legitimate objection if that's the way you interpret the show, right? So he's not just being a hater for the sake of being a hater. He has a critique that, if you look at the show the way he does, if you read the show the way he reads it, is a thoughtful and intelligent critique, right? there are people who don't like it. There are people who don't like it for the same reasons that they don't like Discovery or that they don't like any of the new stuff. There's too many women in it. The male characters are supposedly weak, whatever that means. There aren't enough white people in it, and it's different from other Star Trek. You know, things look different. It's the Enterprise from TOS, but it doesn't look like TOS. You know, or the Gorn look different. And I know David has problems with the way the Gorn are portrayed in terms of like what they represent and how they're portrayed and how, you know, the way that they're presented as you know, scary space monsters without a lot of depth or nuance at this point. But there are some people who just flat out don't like them because they look different, period. They're not bothered about any of the implications or any of the thematic stuff or any of the deeper, more, you know, things that require thought and interpretation. They're just like, that's not how the Gorn are supposed to look, you know? So there's always going to be people that hate on it for that reason as well. So, you know, there are legitimate reasons, even though I may not agree with those reasons and I don't share those reasons, there are legitimate reasons for not liking the show, for not liking any show or any movie, right? It's all a matter of opinion. But a lot of the really angry, you know, anti-Strange New World stuff, I think, is of the other kind, of people who are just pissy fanboys who don't like it for really shallow, superficial, silly reasons. Oh, Geek, thank you very much for the update on Vovacat. John Burns with another super chat saying, Google Akeem recounts his harrowing story. Again, I'm not going to do that. I really don't care, but thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for the super chat. Azalea Jane says, question about Ensigns Log. Just started listening because I'm finally watching TOS. Can you talk about your artistic decision to do them in broadcast order rather than production order? I think Jason and I both agreed that we prefer broadcast order because that's the order that the show was discovered. That's the order the show was received by the audience. You know, that's sort of, if I had to choose like what is the right order, what is the real order, quote unquote, I would say it's broadcast order. And also because doing them in broadcast order instead of production order, it allowed us to do a little joke about why the uniforms are suddenly different when we got to our episode that corresponded with Where No Man Has Gone Before. Like, it's just fun to do that, you know, to think of an excuse for why the uniforms are suddenly different. When the real, I mean, if we had done in production order, we wouldn't have had to do that because the uniforms are different. Then the uniforms are different in the next episode and they're the same for the rest of the show. But there's this one episode that, you know, that is shown after several of the later episodes, the later produced episodes, where all of a sudden they're wearing the uniforms like they wore in the cage, and then boom, they're back to the other uniforms. There's an inconsistency there, and it's fun to have that to joke about, you know. But I think we both kind of regard the broadcast order as the proper order, you know. Yeah, John with the super chat saying Strange New Worlds is so woke, a white cis male, huge accommodation. Yeah, I mean, that's one of that's one of the ironies, I guess, is that, you know, they complain so much about Discovery having a black woman in the lead, you know, and then they do a spinoff, Strange New Worlds, where it's once again a white dude in the lead, and that's not good enough for them either. They don't like that either. So, you know, Isaiah, oh, Rome is a good song. I like Rome too. Steve Schmeling, hey Steve, could you imagine the sex scandal Roddenberry would have if he got into politics? Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, yet another. I mean, the main reason why he wouldn't have gotten anywhere in politics is nobody knew who the fuck he was. But yeah, like, talk about skeletons in your closet. Good Lord. The sex scandal would break before he got a chance to even get anybody to vote for him, I would think. David Colby says, I could articulate it better if I had words and time, but then also it'd be the David Colby Power Hour guest starring Steve Shives and not the Steve Shives Ask Away. I mean, I think I've seen you talk about it enough on Twitter that I think I kind of I feel like I have a decent grasp of where you're coming from. Again, it just comes down to there are things that you interpret as being in the show, or that you interpret the show as saying that are just radically different from how I take the show. Like I watch the show and I just don't see that there at all. But I think I get, at least in general, where you're coming from, or at least I feel like I know what you're going on about, even if I don't personally read the show that way. 255 AD says, Aaron made a video where he said Islam will eventually be the dominant religion in the U.S. I showed it to Thomas, and he said me reading it as great replacement was beyond bad faith. I'm not familiar with the video, so I can't make a comment on that. I do feel like if Aaron said that, he must be thinking, super long term. Like maybe in another 100 years, Islam might be the I think that might even be an unrealistic projection. I don't see that is going to happen anytime remotely soon. Yeah, Steve, exactly. A sex scandal would probably break before Roddenberry finished his announcement. Oh, sorry, Kara, I forgot about your question. Your question is mostly about these SAG writer strikes and whether Hollywood would rather go up in flames than address the problem. I mean, sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? Like it's. I think a lot of it is these studio bosses, and every time they open their mouths and say something in public or something that they have said in private gets leaked, right? They are so out of touch, not just with the experience of the writers and the actors that are on strike, but just with the general mood and priorities of the population of the country. They are so insulated by wealth and privilege and living in their Hollywood bubble that they think they're being reasonable. Like they think that the offers that they have made to the unions are good offers, and they've offered crumbs as far as we can tell. Like they've offered crumbs from the table. And the ridiculous thing is, if they met every single one of the demands currently on the table for both unions, if they just said, you know what, no more negotiations, we're going to give you everything you're asking for, and they met every single proposal, it would cost them, in addition to what the current or the most recent collective bargaining agreements cost, it would cost an additional couple of % of their annual profits per year. The unions are asking for so little in the grand scheme of things that it's absurd that it even got to the point of a strike. And the fact that the strikes have gone on as long as they have and cost these same studios as much money as they have, when all they would have had to do is part with a few extra percentage points of profit per year, is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it does feel like it's about winning for them. It's like, well, we can't let the union win. We're the bosses. We decide who gets paid what. We can't let the union win. It feels like it's more about that to them than even making money, because they're not making money now. Like they're losing money. All these movies and TV shows that they were planning on having in production and ready to go for the fall and next year, like it's all ground to a halt because they don't want to part with a few extra percentage points of profit. Like it won't actually cost them anything. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And there's such a separation between the way they see the world and the way everybody else sees the world that it's striking. It's very striking. Oh, John Smith. You know what? I haven't actually heard this, but it doesn't surprise me. As I understand it, Ms. Lucille Ball almost nixed Trek because she wasn't impressed by Roddenberry's extracurricular activities. Like I say, I haven't heard that story before, but knowing what I know about Gene's extracurricular activities, it doesn't really surprise me. Oh boy, Kane 20C Deathmatch Time. Time Edition. Bill S. Preston Esquire versus Marty Sheamus Marty McFly. I got to put my money on Marty in that one. On Sheamus. Yeah, John Burns with the super chat. Imagine Shatner seeing Pike's accommodations. Yeah, that's what I've made this joke to Jason before when we've watched Strange New Worlds together. I've said, every time somebody complains about how big Pike's quarters are, I just want them to make them bigger. Like I hope next season they unveil like a completely new room in Pike's quarters that we've never seen before. The more people complain about it and the more people, say like, well, Kirk's quarters aren't that big in TOS, the more I'm like, make Pike's even bigger. Make Pike's even bigger. Because yes, it's very different. It's very different. 22580 says, I actually showed it to you at the time in 2018, I think, in a question I asked 5 years ago. I don't remember watching it. I may not have even watched it. Or if I did, I don't remember. John Burns asks, how many CEOs were part of Cruise's Les Grossman? I mean, that character could have been based on any number of people. If I ever knew, I have forgotten, and I may not have ever actually known if it was based on any specific person, but that character, it feels like, could have been based and could be reflective of any number of executives in Hollywood. Brian Baker says, isn't the strike about the production and streaming services just maximizing profit? Does Paramount really want to launch a starship like Bezos and Musk? Yeah, I do think a sticking point for the studios is they do not want to have to be honest with people about how successful or not successful their streaming services are. Because one of the things that both unions are asking for is an increased streaming residual. And one of the things they're asking for in order to verify that people who are due residuals are getting what they should be getting is that the owners of the streaming services will have to disclose who is watching what and how much each show is being watched, and basically how much profit is being made by the streaming service and how much of it can be attributed to which particular show, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's how you determine who gets owed how much of a residual for various projects. And right now, and ever since the current streaming platform, era began, the companies that run streaming services have not had to share any of that information. And they have only shared it in very, very limited circumstances when they felt it was to their benefit to do so. And there's no way to verify that it's even accurate. They could have said whatever they wanted. Like they said something recently about how, Disney Plus said something about how like the new Star Wars series, Ahsoka, is like super, super successful. It's been streamed, like 17 million hours or something. Like that's how many people have watched it. And we don't know if that's true. We don't even know if that's even good. We don't know what that means relative to, we have no baseline to compare to because they never released these numbers. They just released a big sounding number and said, look, our new Star Wars show is doing great. It's been streamed, for 11 billion minutes or whatever the fuck they said. Doesn't mean anything because we have no basis for a comparison. There's no context to put it in. And if the strikes are settled in the way that the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild would like to have them settled, and that information becomes available, if not publicly available, at least available to the unions, so that these residuals can be verified as being accurate, then the companies won't be able to do that anymore. They'll have to be honest about who's watching their streaming platforms and how much and what shows they're watching. And they really don't want to do that for some reason. Another super chat from John Burns. Thank you very much, my friend, for being so generous tonight. I think Scott Rudin was one. He admitted this. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, David, they give up money, they can earn more money. If they give up power, they don't get that back so easily. But they really don't even have to give up any power. I mean, they would have to lose face. They would have to give up the power of being the ones that won the strike. You know, we held out longer. The unions came crawling back begging to make a deal. You know, if they capitulate to the unions, then it makes them look like, oh, they gave up, you know, which is what they should do and is what everybody wants them to do and would actually make them look better. That's another thing that they just don't get. Everybody is on the side of the unions in this. Everybody's on the side of the writers and the actors. There are very few people who are like, I'm on the side of the studios, you know. So if they did settle the strike, it would actually make them look better. It would make them look like, oh, they're actually being reasonable for once. They're actually paying the artists who create the product that they sell and get rich off of a fair compensation. It would make them look better than if they held out until people started losing their houses, like they said was the plan at one point, and then, you know, signed a new deal with like a broken, desperate union. That would not make them look good. They think that would make them look good because they're out to fucking lunch. They have no idea what anything looks like because they have no perspective. But that would actually make them look better. Yeah, Azalea, next season's Pike's Quarters is a TARDIS. Exactly. Just make it impossibly huge. Yeah. And expand the bar so it has like multiple levels. Like create spaces that are just absolutely impossible to believe that they exist in a starship. Yes. Yeah. Oh, Bruce, that's great. Next season, Pike has a horse stable. Perfect. Yeah, and a swimming pool. Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I love these ideas. Scrolling back up to catch on a few things that I missed. Steve Schmaling says, speaking of the strike, I don't quite share the hate of Star Trek V. It was the first Star Trek I saw in the theater. I think if not for a strike and better budget, it would have been better. Thoughts? I think Star Trek V is a bad movie, but honestly, I do not share the hate in it either. I think there are a couple of Star Trek movies that are way worse than Star Trek V. Like I think Generations and Nemesis are way worse than Star Trek V. Like way worse. I don't think Star Trek V is good, but there are things about Star Trek V that I really like. I've said this before. I love the sense of camaraderie among the crew in Star Trek V. Which is really impressive when you remember that Shatner directed that movie and everybody except for Nimoy and DeForest Kelley hated Shatner. And yet that film that Shatner directed, there you get a sense of the closeness and the comfort of the crew with each other that you never really get with the entire crew in any of the other movies. You always get the feeling, the friendship between Kirk and Spock and McCoy always comes through. But you don't always get the sense of like the shared feeling of service and loyalty and friendship that is shared among the entire bridge crew. And in Star Trek V, you get that. And I appreciate that. And I like that. So yeah, there are parts of it that I really enjoy, even though overall I think it's a crummy movie, but it's not even close to the worst Star Trek movie for me. And also Isaiah Taylor says, I've always liked the sets from TNG. I wonder what happened to all those sets. I mean, I would assume that, you know, they were struck and maybe there's elements of them that are still in storage somewhere. I think they had to completely rebuild when they brought back the Enterprise D for Picard season 3 and they built the bridge set. As my understanding is that's a completely new set. Like it was built to, you know, to be an exact or close to exact replica of the original TNG bridge set, but it was not literally the same set. So you would think if the old set was still in storage, they could have just used it. I mean, I'm sure they would have had to upgrade it so it would look good in HD, but I doubt they would have had to, you know, rebuild a completely new set entirely from scratch, which I think is what they did. Kara, that's a good observation. Shatner said he never got the character of Peter Quincy Taggart from Galaxy Quest while everyone else did. Yeah, but you know the thing about Taggart in Galaxy Quest, and I noticed this when Dana and I did our watch-along live stream of it a few months ago. Yeah, David, we will always have hating Picard season 2. That will always be our bond, even if we may differ in other things. We will always have a shared loathing of Picard season 2. It's the worst season of Star Trek ever made, so far. But anyway, back to Kara's question about Shatner and Galaxy Quest. The thing I noticed about Taggart in Galaxy Quest when Dana and I watched it most recently for our live stream watch along, that is definitely not true of Shatner. The Tim Allen character, the actor Tim Allen, not the character he plays in the show within the show, but like his actor character in Galaxy Quest, Jason Nesmith, has clearly watched the show. Like he can banter with the fans about details about the show. And even though, you know, when he hears some fans talking shit about him, he gets kind of resentful, and he has his get a life moment that Shatner had in the Saturday Night Live sketch. Like, he clearly has a knowledge of the show that Shatner just does not have of Star Trek. Like, you get the sense from Shatner, and it's not fair to single out Shatner because this is true of a lot of actors, but you get the sense from Shatner that he never even watched the show. Like, he has very little actual knowledge of Star Trek, you know, Star Trek trivia and stuff. Jason Nesmith, Tim Allen's character in Galaxy Quest, clearly has watched the show and can speak about things that happened in episodes and little details and stuff. You'd never hear Shatner doing that because Shatner doesn't have that knowledge because Shatner doesn't care. And by the way, that's completely fine. I don't hold that against Shatner. I mean, there's a million reasons why William Shatner is an asshole. Him not knowing very much about Star Trek is not one of them. Yeah, and of course, yeah, the Peter Quincy Taggart character on the show within a show. Yeah, that's obviously a riff on Captain Kirk with the rolling and, you know, the lines about how, you know, I see you found a way to get out of your shirt, like that kind of thing. Like, you know, he's clearly, you know, a parody of Captain Kirk, and that Shatner didn't pick up on that is, you know, I think it tells you something about Shatner, doesn't it? Kane 20C, there are people who like Picard season 2. There are people who like Picard season 2. I don't get it. Like I said, it's not even a close call for me. It's not just the worst season of that series. It's the worst season of any Star Trek show I've ever seen by quite a ways. Like, it's, you know, it's like, oh shit, this is terrible. This is just terrible from top to bottom. Everything about this is bad. But there are people who really enjoy it. So they are out there. They are out there. Steve, I didn't think that. But that's hilarious. The MST3K reference there. Rock climbing. Yes, I should have thought of that. I think maybe the first time I saw Star Trek V, I had not yet seen Mystery Science Theater, so I didn't have it locked and loaded. But next time I watch it, I will be thinking of that. David Colby says, like Strange New Worlds at the end of the day makes me mad because it has quality going into it. It should be good and it can be good. The fact that it doesn't is what makes me so mad. I suppose in contrast to Picard Season 2, which was just garbage in, garbage out. David also says, though, actually, hot take, I think Season 3 is almost worse than Season 2 because at least Season 2 isn't a cloying, pandering, nostalgia-baiting slop fest for pigs, for hogs. I think I made a similar point in my video about Season 3 of Picard. Even though I do think Season 3 of Picard overall is better than Season 2, one thing that both Season 1 and Season 2 of Picard have going for them, again, even though, and I can't stress this enough, Season 2 of Picard is a total failure in every respect. But one thing it has, along with Season 1 of Picard, that Picard Season 3 just does not have, is a tiny little spark of creative ambition. Like they're at least trying to do something that has not been done before. Now, season 2 does have a lot of repetition in it, and there is a lot of really obvious, clumsy, incredibly annoying fan service in season 2, like the fucking punk on the bus and the utterly inexplicable, completely meaningless, superfluous Wesley cameo, and the fact that the basic story is like a time travel story that is broadly similar to both Star Trek 4 and City on the Edge of Forever, both of which managed to tell similar stories in a tiny fraction of the time that it takes season 2 to fucking get to the point of it. So it's not like season 2 is like bursting with originality, but it's at least trying to do some things that haven't been done before, or trying to do things that have been done before in ways that haven't yet been done, or find new things to say about Picard's character at the very least. Even though it's not very good and not very creative, at least they're not just saying, oh, here's the same Picard you knew from 30 years ago, and now here he is again doing the same shit he did back then. And that's literally all season 3 wanted to do. There was not an ounce of creative ambition in the entire thing. It was just, hey, let's try to wind back the clock. I know what you want to see. You want to see the same old characters doing the same old things. Well, here you go. Like there was not an ounce of ambition to it. And even though in terms of story structure and in terms of a couple of episodes being good, like it was definitely an improvement. Like it was an improvement, but it was disappointing because it was like, God, you really didn't want this to be anything other than nostalgia, did you? Like you had nothing of your own to say with this at all, other than Star Trek sure is neat, isn't it? You know? Yeah. So, okay, 25580. Let me scroll back and see your last post. Is it this one? I feel bad about the fact my dad sometimes doesn't get mad when I've woke him. Like he responds with ableism, but not always. I feel like I've made him seem worse than he is 2 weeks ago. Well, no, I mean, you're expressing your experience, and if your experience with him is negative, I think it's fine for you to express that. Like I said, when you described him saying, well, we could plant a tree in your question, I assumed that was him trying to be helpful, just doing it in a misguided way. So like, I don't get the impression that your dad is like a fucking monster. I just think that he doesn't understand where you're coming from, and he doesn't have, enough patience or understanding or empathy for you to treat you better than he treats you. But I don't think he comes across as like the worst person who ever lived. So if you feel bad for portraying him that way, I think you're off the hook. Like I don't, well, when you talk about your dad in questions, I don't think, oh Jesus, this fucking guy, why can't he just fall into a pit somewhere? Like I don't think that. I think it's a lack of understanding and a lack of communication between the two of you that is the result of it. And him coming from a very different place and a very different generation. And like you said, there's a lot of issues mixed in there with ableism and ignorance and lack of understanding and maybe lack of an awareness of the need to understand, if that makes sense. But yeah, I wouldn't feel too bad about the way you have portrayed him. Oh yes, Bruce, a gratuitous, needless, and pointless car chase. One of the most pointless car chases that I've ever seen in anything. Who are they running from? Where are they trying to go? Doesn't matter. It's just a car driving places. Ooh, how exciting. Oh, Steve, that's a good one. It fits the metrics of the song. Stone Cold got run over by Rikishi. Backstage one night at Monday Night Raw. I'd have to work on that. But yeah, there's something there. And Isaiah, yes, it's okay if you like Armageddon for any reason. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean if you can like it as a guilty pleasure, or you can like it because you think it's good. Like, you don't need permission or forgiveness from me. Brian says, what would you say about the idea of Star Trek Starfleet administrative offices? If it was written by a writing staff with a good sense of humor and a good take on it, I think it could be a really funny idea. Yeah, Seal0626 says, yes, when Strange New Worlds did a car chase, it advanced the plot. In fact, one of the little petty pleasures about that episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, is that a lot of it does feel like they said, let's do season 2 of Star Trek Picard, but in an hour and 100 times better. And I think it succeeds exquisitely as that. I think, as I said in my season long, as I said when Jason and I reviewed it at the time, and as I said in my season recap video I put up earlier this week, I think Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is one of the best episodes of the season. I really, really loved it. And yes, there was a little part of me that was like, hey, this is Picard season 2, only good and 1/10 as long, But anyway, so I'm going to wrap up the show. We've been going over 2 hours now. I'm sure some of y'all have better things to do. And I have a frozen peanut butter sandwich waiting for me in the freezer that I am now going to go and enjoy this evening. But anyway, so if anybody has any final questions, that you can go ahead and throw them in the chat, and I'll come back for one last peek after I get through my customary closing plugs and stuff. So first of all, don't forget, I saw Geek putting links in the chat earlier, and I see he's going for it again, give Phoenix money, etc. Don't forget, charitylinks.page is linked in the description of this live stream. That is a Google Doc that is maintained by our friend Some Random Geek, where it contains links to donate to some friends of ours who need a helping hand. So if that is something you are able to do and interested in doing, we encourage you to do that. Please, it would be very much appreciated by all of us. Also, don't forget, there are links still in the description if you want to support the striking writers and actors. There are links to related funds and fundraisers to help support the strikers as they continue to hold out for a better deal for Hollywood writers and actors. Very important. If you want to support my work here on YouTube, you have a couple of options. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, or you can become a channel member just by clicking the join button. Either one of those is fine with me. I really appreciate my supporters, whether they are patrons or members. One of the perks that you get if you are either a patron or a member at any level from $1 a month on up is you get to submit questions ahead of time for these Ask Away live streams. If you have a question, if there's a topic you want me to talk about, and I always make sure to respond to patron and member questions first thing. That's that first segment of the show. That's always how Ask Away starts. And patrons and members of all levels get access to that if that's something that you want to take advantage of. So patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button. I could not do this without my patrons and members. So thank you all so much for your support. And thanks to those of you who are thinking about becoming supporters. And if you can afford it, I would highly encourage you to do so. And thank you very much. Also, don't forget, in addition to the YouTube thing, I'm the co-host of a couple of podcasts that are a part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. I am the co-host alongside the great Jason Harding of Late Seating, the movie review podcast. We have a new episode out this week, our latest episode of Late Seating, which is our review of one of my favorite films ever, a movie I have loved since I was a little kid, starring the late, great Paul Reubens. Of course, I'm talking about Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the absurdist comedy masterpiece, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. We reviewed that, and it is up now for your enjoyment, so please listen to our review of Pee-wee's Big Adventure if you enjoy movie review podcasts. I think you'll really enjoy it. Jason and I both really love that movie. And also, in addition to that, I am one of the cast members on the Ensigns Log, also alongside Jason and also Dana Cole. And it is a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast where we play characters who serve aboard currently the TNG era Starship Enterprise, and our show is about our show, and our stories are about our characters, but we have the events of Star Trek The Next Generation kind of happening in the background as our stuff is happening. So it's a really fun show to do, and a lot of people who have listened to it have said that it's a fun show to listen to. So if you like Star Trek, and if you like funny Star Trek stuff, if you enjoy the Star Trek themed stuff that I do on this channel, and you haven't done so yet, check out the Ensigns Log. And links to both podcasts are also in the description of the video. So that's it. Let me take one last look at the live chat and see if anybody has any final comments or questions. Kara says, thank you for reading my question. Lovely to chat with you tonight. Catch you next time. It was lots of fun. Well, thank you, Kara. I'm glad I was able to get to your question. I'm sorry that there was some technical difficulty with the submission form for the patron questions, or the member question, whichever members, I guess, in your case. But yeah, I'm glad you could join us. It's always nice to see you. And let me see. 255 AD says, by the way, do you remember when I told you about that tree planting sadness in a past question? It does ring a bell. Yes, it does ring a bell. Daryl says, great Star Trek talk and a great payday. So good holiday weekend to everyone. Well, thank you, Daryl. Good holiday weekend to you. Happy Labor Day, everybody, if you're in the United States and you celebrate Labor Day this weekend. Yes, R.I.P. Paul Rubens, absolutely. One of my favorite performers. It was very sad to lose him, but Pee-wee's Big Adventure is one of those movies. I was so I had not watched it for a few years, and I was so happy that I watched it for the show last week, and it's just as funny as I remember it. Holds up completely. Brian Baker says, thank you for your service and efforts. We may not always agree, but I appreciate your thoughtfulness and intelligence. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you being around and you being a supporter. Steve Schmeling says, I've been going through your 5 Things series again. Love them, though some are a bit dated and some didn't age real well, sadly. I know it's old news, but I'm sorry about your divorce. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Things are okay, though. I mean, Ashley and I don't speak every day, don't speak on a regular basis, but last I heard from her, she's doing well, and I'm doing well, so I appreciate the thought, but, you know, we're both doing okay. So, you know, things happen and life goes on. And, yeah, but thank you for saying that. And Kane, yes, as far as the background in the Ensign's Log. I agree, and that's something I have liked about it. As anyone who knows my feelings about, you know, fan service and conspicuous references to canon and stuff, I like the fact that our show exists in a Star Trek world and there's, you know, canonical Star Trek stuff kind of happening around us, but our show is not about that. Our show is about our stuff. And Kyle 3000 says, do you have any thoughts on YouTubers and Twitch streamers producing reaction content? I can just say I don't watch it. I don't find it interesting. There's a lot of it that strikes me as fake, which is fine. Like there's nothing wrong with acting, with pretending for an effect. But I think a lot of it is presented as though the reactor is giving a genuine reaction. And there's some of that I have my doubts. Like, is this really the first time you've heard this song? Is this really the first time you've seen this movie? Some of the reactions feel not genuine in the ones that I have seen. And a lot of it's just repetitive, and a lot of it's based on just pre-existing factors that just don't apply to me. You know, like I don't care how people react. I would rather see like a movie review by a critic who watched the movie and has some thoughts on it. You know, the idea of watching someone, and look, my hands are not completely clean. I've very, very occasionally, I have done reaction videos. Like, I mean, once in a blue moon, I might do a reaction video where like I'm watching a trailer for something and I'll record myself. But I've done maybe 2 or 3 of those in my whole YouTube career. I don't think of myself as being very good at it. It's not really where my skill lies or where my interest lies. And it's just not the kind of content I enjoy, you know? So I don't really watch anybody who does that because it's not what I'm interested in. But boy, there's a lot of people who are interested in it. So good for them. All right, that's it, everybody. I'm calling it to a close. Thank you all once again so much for watching. Thank you for all the great questions. Thank you for the great conversation. Thank you for spending your Friday with me. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Happy Labor Day to those of you who celebrate. And that's it. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.